It is the 22nd of February, roughly 5 p.m., almost sunset, and we are in Ras Al Khaimah in the UAE, filming a car that is unlike anything we have ever done. It's a super special Brabus. I don't even know if I can call it a supercar. I don't know what to call it. It's a super special car, unlike any other Brabus. And this is the perfect location, in the desert of Ras Al Khaimah, to film what it can do. But also, of course, we're going to talk about tech. We're going to talk about the idea behind the product. And we're going to talk about all the nice little features this car has. We had the first ideas for this car in 2019-2020. And the idea was to create an extreme off-road Brabus supercar. We did not know back then what it was going to look like. But of course, today we know, and it's right here. Ladies and gentlemen, the Brabus crawler. And who better to talk about tech and all the features of this car and how it came about than the almighty Jörn. Jörn Gander, our CTO.
Hello.
Jörn, how are you?
Great.
What is this?
This is our idea of an extreme off-road tool. That is, a high-performance off-road vehicle which originally started out as a kind of toy or crazy idea.
Yeah.
However, there is, of course, a lot of technology that we actually already offer. We have a 900 horsepower engine, which we've already seen in the Brabus 900 Rocket Edition or Brabus Rocket. The 4.5-liter V8 engine from our own production. We have portal axles from the XLP, which is another very important part of a serious off-road vehicle. And we now have, and this is actually the next step, our own chassis, a tube frame chassis, our own carbon body kit. And we've adapted everything in a way that's ideally suited for off-road use, and particularly here in this environment.
The crawler looks a bit similar to the G, but when you take a closer look, you see right away that this is a completely different car. Why is that?
Because we've developed a completely custom chassis. Certainly we use components from the G, like the engine, the drivetrain. Although the engine is our rocket engine with the 4.5-liter conversion, 900 horsepower, 1250 newton meters of maximum torque. But other than that, it's a completely newly designed car. We've got the portal axles from the XLP in here, and most importantly, you can see a piece of it here, the newly developed tube frame chassis, which serves as the load-bearing structure for this car.
That means the engine from the G900 Rocket Edition, 4.5-liter V8, 900 horsepower, 1,250 newton meters of torque, portal axle system from the XLP, our go-anywhere pickup, an absolutely amazing car. I mean, both are really great cars, but that's where it ends. That's it. From that point on, we shift to a completely independent design. And the tube frame chassis and the carbon fiber body are entirely new. Once again, this is the next step because, of course, the carbon fiber parts and also their complexity are significantly greater than all the other projects we've done with carbon fiber to date.
Exactly. Of course, there are more parts in the vehicle, especially in this case, and they're also much larger. The entire side panel, which runs from front to back in a single piece, is very complex and very large. And what presented a major challenge, and now I'm using a very technical term, but it's actually important and sums it up nicely, is something called the dimensional and tolerance concept. We have a welded frame. This naturally has a narrow tolerance window, but a tolerance window nonetheless. And then you have carbon on top of that, which has yet another tolerance window. And all that has to come together. And that was quite a challenge for us, to reconcile these two tolerance windows, the welded steel construction and carbon pre-preg screw construction, so that everything fits together properly on the car frame.
I think, what we've got here is an absolutely extreme car. We made a conscious decision from the outset that if we build an off-road tool, It has to be recognizable at first glance. That means no doors, professional navigation system. For the passenger, monoblock HD, and as much power as possible. Professional four-way off-road suspension system, racing seats, right? Bucket seats, don't forget. No windshield. So this no windshield thing means, of course, that you're completely exposed to the elements. So you really experience and feel the drive. And that's exactly what we're going for. Here we've done something else. To make it easier for driver and passenger to communicate, there's an intercom system.
Yeah, there are actually two ways to talk to one another. One is the intercom system as a simple headset option. You wear safety goggles so that your eyes are also protected from the airstream. It's a very open, cool experience, as we saw earlier. However, there are also helmets. So if you really want to drive in harsh weather conditions, for example, during the tests in Germany we drove when it was raining, wearing a helmet is quite advantageous. Perfect communication, you can hear each other clear as day.
Because with 900 horsepower, no windshield, no doors, it can get a bit loud. And so that you can still understand each other, there's a two-way radio.
Exactly. You may be wondering how you can communicate if the microphone is exposed to the wind. But it really works very well because the wind is filtered out a bit. We just drove really well together. The co-driver can concentrate on the navigation while the driver concentrates on driving and on reading the terrain. Because as we just saw, it's not always so easy to assess what's coming next. Like, is there a jump?
It's like in a rally. It's like a rally car. So we just drove with intercom and without intercom. For me, it seemed to work both with and without, so you don't have to use the intercom in this car. It's just very, very comfortable when you're drifting at a high speed through the desert. The interior, though, is completely unique beyond that as well. Why did you build it the way you did?
It's pure. It's very stripped down. We have 4 racing bucket seats in it, so you're really perfectly seated in the car, firmly secured in the car by the 4-point harness seatbelts. Because with all the movements that occur during fast off-road driving, there's just no way to hold on to anything. You have to be securely seated in the car, really strapped in. Otherwise, it's truly built for the use case. That is, we have proper sheet metal trim here. We have upholstery on the seats, which we're very familiar with from Brabus Marine. It's the same material, and by the way, the same quilting pattern.
It's interesting. We really learned a lot there, didn't we? So I can see how much we're now using the outdoor materials, especially the outdoor materials, because obviously at Brabus Marine, there's constant exposure to salt on the boats. You got your extreme temperature differences, sweat on the upholstery, you have things like sunblock and lotion, all kinds of stuff. And now, after a few years of experience with the marine business, that quickly migrates back to the cars, like here, for example, with the seats.
Right, because you have similar conditions. That is, we have no doors, no windows, the car is completely open. So of course the debate was, okay, what do we use for the upholstery?
Leather, certainly not.
Right. So we soon settled on exactly the same material as we use in the outdoor range for the Brabus 900 shadow boats. Then we said, well, if we're going to use it anyway, we'll also use the same quilting pattern. Then you can recognize it immediately. Because at the end of the day, it's a Brabus product whether it floats or drives. And then this really stylish seat design came about. But it also really serves a use case for this car, meaning it's extremely robust. We've been driving around in the sand all day today, but we've also driven in Germany in 4-degree temperatures and rain. This material withstands all that. Plus, it looks good. As far as the interior is concerned, the steering wheel is another part we took from the G. It's the steering wheel from the G because we also adopted the electronics. A very important subject, again, very minimalistic, the instrument panel, which is also completely made of carbon fiber. The corresponding instrument cluster runs here. The display for speed, RPM, and all other information. And for the passenger, very dominant, attached to beautiful red anodized aluminum holders, a very large 12-inch off-road navigation system. It offers you real topographical maps that you can load. We already use them several times today because it's difficult to get your bearings here, and you really do need this help. For example, we selected base camp as a fixed point. And you can just say, okay, I want to go from here to there, and it tells you to go left or right, because there are no roads, just simply the direction and go.
So at the moment, we're here in Ras Al Khaimah, which is about 2 hours away from Dubai. So right in the middle of the desert. We drove about 60 minutes from the center of town to get here. And wherever you look, there's nothing, and absolutely nothing. And for that, we have just the right navigation system here.
That's what happens when I drive a car like this as an off-road tool. When I'm driving off-road, I need the right navigation system, one that doesn't tell me which road I can't take because there isn't one, but rather one that simply tells me the direction of the compass and the corresponding GPS information. Once again, it's similar to that of a boat. You wouldn't navigate a boat any differently than you would when we are here off-road. It's displayed accordingly well. The passenger can operate it easily and give proper instructions to the driver via intercom. Keep to the left, keep to the right, so that we find the right way.
Let's talk about a topic that I think is important to everybody: sound. Sound. You get a lot in the car, and there have been tons of inquiries lately where people have asked us to make a car again that rumbles with a powerful sound. Many of the old G-Class fans, for example, ask us this almost regularly. Every week I see the comments. Here it is, the Brabus supercar with real rumbling sound. Jörn, fired up. Something for adults.
The sound is powerful, yeah. Of course, that's also because with such a non-road legal off-road tool, which we have here, we don't have to comply with noise regulations.
So, in other words, we have many more options because this is a pure, and I mean pure off-road vehicle.
However, and this may also be interesting to mention, I don't think we overdid it, because loud doesn't always automatically mean good sound. One thing that is important to mention with regard to emissions is that the car has a catalytic converter and a particulate filter. Just like other cars, this vehicle has everything that's required and would even, in theory, meet the Euro 6 emission standard.
Because, of course, and this is also typical of Brabus, there's been almost no development in our history since 1977 where car number one, that is the first, you can't call it a prototype, but the first car wouldn't have been theoretically customer compatible in the end. That means that even today we build cars in such a way that when we assemble them, they function completely. And that's what we've done here as well. Of course, the plan is always that we might continue with this story at some point, which is why the car is also fully equipped accordingly.
Yes, exactly. So, really cool sound. I think when you drive, and there will be more driving shots that show off the sound, and better, because when it's driving up a sand dune with a load, for example, the sound is of course really good. But on the whole, it's just pure driving. You don't focus on anything but driving. Because why should you, right? And that's why it's open. That's why, for example, there's no windshield. That's also why it weighs relatively little, despite being a very large, high-performance off-road vehicle. Allow me this comparison. This car weighs just over 2 tons, with portal axles, with everything you see here, which is about half a ton. In other words, 500 kilos lighter than a standard G63. Of course, without windshields, etc., the weight we've reduced has to come from somewhere, but that gives you an idea of the proportions.
One of the most important aspects of any off-road vehicle is, of course, ground clearance. And as we've already said, this car features the basic portal axle system from the XLP, but with a few minor modifications.
Right, so again, very briefly, you can see here, because it is very open, what it means to have a portal axle. You can see there's a corresponding offset between the center of the wheel and the center of the axle. That's why you have the large casings with the respective gearboxes here on the side. This difference in height naturally creates the corresponding ground clearance under the differential that we need. As you just said, one major difference between this chassis and these axles and the XLP is that we have electronically adjustable suspension on the XLP. We didn't use it on this car because it's even lighter. We need one less control unit. We need fewer cables and so on. And we wanted to implement it here in a purer and reduced form. Nevertheless, there are four-way adjustable high-performance shock absorbers in here. The reason I say four-way, as you can see here, is that I can adjust the so-called low-speed and high-speed range for low damping forces and high damping forces independently of each other, using a total of 13 different positions on both the tension and pressure sides. This morning, because we'd been driving in Germany until now, not in the desert, not in the sand, we quickly adjusted the dampers. Within 15 minutes, we fine-tuned them. And that made a huge difference in terms of riding comfort and driving performance. That's a nice feature. And because it's extremely accessible, we were able to fine-tune it a little more today.
You know what's interesting? I don't think any vehicle we've built to date has been able to demonstrate the portal axle as beautifully as this one. The view is unobstructed, and that's exactly what the car is all about. If we take another look at the front of the chassis and the suspension, what fascinates me so much is not only that the thing looks like a true rally car, but also that when you're driving, when you're not sitting in the car, but it's driving past you, for example, you can see the thing working non-stop. There's a lot going on here when we're driving on this terrain.
Well, we were out there earlier on a large, flat plateau where you can also drive very fast. We drove at a top speed of just under 200 kilometers per hour here in the desert. And when you drove by earlier, for example, it was super exciting for us to see what the wheel movements are like. You can really see how everything moves and how all the impacts and the waves are absorbed. Something that also plays a role in that, we have front and rear shock absorbers made of the highest quality aluminum. These are equipped with heat sinks. Why? A damper has a lot of movement. The oil in there gets warm. Friction generates heat. Therefore, the cooling is there to keep the temperatures low or lower to keep the dampers from getting too hot.
Suitable for the chassis is the monoblock HD in the 20-inch version, not in the 22-inch version, and that's completely intentional because we really want to do some proper off-roading here, which means that this is actually a carryover from the Survival. So the camping and also more off-road oriented variant of the XLP, but with some differences.
Yes, so the rim is exactly the same as the 20-inch version, as you correctly point out. The special feature here is that, in contrast to the XLP, we are using a different tire, a tire significantly larger in outer diameter than on the XLP, in order to have even more performance off-road. Another thing, as is always the case with the 20-inch monoblock HD, is a special inner hump with this rim. That is, we have a special contour where the tire is taken up here on the inside of the rim to be able to drive with low air pressures. This means that the tire is still held in place. For example, we're currently driving here with 1.4 bar cold pressure, and it is held in the rim with the appropriate devices.
Suspension, wheels, and what I also notice, the inner fender and wheel well have a very special look. That's an area I'm familiar with from some of the cars from last year.
That's a Kevlar inner fender. That's the same material we used on the Rocket, for example, for the front and rear inner fenders. A very tough, lightweight material. And that's why it's here, because with rocks, sand, and everything that flies into the wheel well here, Kevlar just has a higher resistance than carbon fiber would have. And in terms of weight, it's similar.
At the heart of the crawler is the 4.5-liter V8, 900 horsepower, 1,250 Newton-meter engine from the G900 Rocket Edition.
That's correct.
1-to-1. And that's the only thing that stems from the 900 Rocket Edition. Everything else is new. Let's take a look at the engine.
Okay, let's have a look.
In order to do that, first of all, and because it's a full carbon fiber chassis, we have to take off the entire front end. And then we can have a look at the engine here up front.
Not only the engine, we also see some more of the details of the tube frame. You can just see a lot of technology. It's a module you lift off completely. Here's the 4.5-liter 900 horsepower engine. And here you can see a very massive diagonal brace for the strut brace, which supports everything here. So there's a lot of technology, pure technology.
And an engine screaming with sheer power. So we've already driven it this morning, and we're going to take it for another spin right now. An incredible display of power from this car.
Right, because it's just so raw. Here's another detail worth mentioning. Usually, the engine is fitted into such a chassis via hydraulic engine mounts. That's always the case for comfort reasons, so as to eliminate any vibrations and so on. Here we got rid of it completely. That means the engine, the entire drivetrain, gearbox, and so on is firmly screwed into the chassis here without any bearings. Of course, an advantage of this is that you notice immediately when the engine has been started. On the other hand, of course, when you're driving, there are a good, 400 kilos with the transmission and everything, which are then oil damped in the chassis, and of course, they also move. For performance reasons, we wanted to do away with that completely for off-road driving, so that you don't have this 400-kilogram mass bobbing back and forth in the car. That's why we took this very radical approach, which is simply the right way to go from the performance point of view.
It really surprised me. So when I got into the car this morning, I have to say, I expected to feel much more, for lack of a better word, rattling. But that wasn't the case at all. I talked to the guys who have been out here filming with us all day, the guys who are shooting the film for the crawler here in the next few days, and the feedback I've gotten is rather that the entire car radiates an uncanny precision. So the driving response is extremely precise. And that was exactly the feeling I got when I was driving it too. It gives you a responsiveness and a sense of control because it reacts exactly to what you're doing instantly. And sure, it also gives you this feedback that you can feel. For me personally, I'm more impressed by that as opposed to seeing it as something negative.
Absolutely. Because let's face it, not everyone is a professional rally driver or rally raid driver who participates regularly in the Paris-Dakar. That means we all depend on having a vehicle that gives us safety and appropriate feedback. And that's what this car can do. Think of the drive we did today. After only a few kilometers, we were drifting around trees and bushes in a car with 900 horsepower. But after just a few kilometers, you get a real feel for it and can implement it well. But this safety, this predictability must come from the car, from the chassis, from the entire vehicle concept.
So I guess that about sums it up, right? There's only one thing left to do. Let's fire it up and take it for a spin. Yeah?
Yeah, let's do it.